The Supreme Court decision just came down 9-0, and it is already changing the rules in every single state across America. If you own a gun, carry a gun, or even think about buying one, this ruling affects you right now, and what happens next could redefine your Second Amendment rights forever. Before we dive in, do me one favor, hit that subscribe button right now. Why? Because 90% of gun owners miss critical legal updates like this, and I don't want you to be one of them. This channel breaks down complex gun laws into plain English so you can stay legal and stay protected. So, click subscribe, and let's get into what just happened. Here's what you need to know. The Supreme Court just issued a unanimous decision. That means all 9 justices agreed, which almost never happens in gun cases. This ruling came down in a case that started in one state, but now applies to all 50 states, every territory, and every jurisdiction in America. The decision changes how states can enforce certain gun laws. And more importantly, it changes what prosecutors can and cannot do when they charge someone with a gun crime. Let me break this down for you. The case involved a person who was charged under a state law for possessing a firearm. Now, the specific details of the charge are not as important as what the Supreme Court said about how these charges have to be handled. The court ruled that when states create gun laws, they have to follow very specific constitutional standards. They can't just make up rules and hope they stick. Every single gun law now has to pass a test, and if it doesn't, that law is unconstitutional. Here's the part that affects you directly. This decision builds on a previous Supreme Court case from 2 years ago called New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. That case said that gun laws have to be consistent with America's historical tradition of firearm regulation. That clears throat. In other words, if there's no history of a similar law existing back when the Second Amendment was written, modern states can't just create that law out of thin air. Now, this new 9-0 decision takes that principle and supercharges it. The Supreme Court just told every state, every city, and every local government that they have to prove their gun laws match historical traditions. If they can't prove it, the law gets thrown out. Let that sink in for a second. States now have to do their homework before they can restrict your gun rights. But here's the crazy part. This decision doesn't just apply to new laws. It applies to laws that are already on the books right now. That means thousands of gun laws across the country are suddenly up for review. If those laws don't meet the historical standard, they could be challenged in court and struck down. We're talking about laws involving where you can carry, how you can carry, what types of guns you can own, and even how you store your firearms at home. Let me give you a real-world example to explain this. Imagine you live in a state that says you can't carry a firearm in any public park. Under the old system, that law might have stood just because the state said it was for public safety. But under this new Supreme Court standard, the state has to prove that similar laws existed back in the 1700s or 1800s. If they can't find historical evidence of park carry bans, that law is unconstitutional, and you can challenge it in court. Here's another scenario. Let's say your state requires you to show good cause or a special reason to get a concealed carry permit. Maybe they say you need to prove you're in danger before they'll give you the permit. Well, the Bruen case already said that kind of requirement is unconstitutional, and this new 9-0 ruling reinforces that. States can't make you beg for permission to exercise a constitutional right. If you're finding this helpful, imagine what you'll learn in my next video about the 5 words that protect you when cops ask about your gun. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Seriously, those 5 words could be the difference between walking away free and sitting in handcuffs. Hit that subscribe button now. Now, let's talk about what this means for everyday gun owners like you. First thing, if you've ever been denied a gun permit, denied a carry license, or told you can't carry in certain places, this decision gives you a stronger legal argument to fight back. You can now point to the Supreme Court ruling and say, prove that this restriction has historical roots. If the state can't, you've got a solid case. Second, this decision is going to spark a wave of lawsuits. Gun rights groups are already preparing to challenge laws in states like California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Massachusetts. These states have some of the strictest gun laws in the country, and a lot of those laws are now vulnerable. We're talking about assault weapon bans, magazine capacity limits, red flag laws, and restrictions on where you can carry. All of these could be challenged under this new standard. Third, and this is huge, prosecutors now have a harder job. If they want to charge you with violating a gun law, they have to prove that the law itself is constitutional under this historical test. That means more cases could get dismissed, more charges could get dropped, and more gun owners could walk free if the law doesn't hold up in court. But wait, there's something even more important you need to understand. This decision also affects how judges interpret gun laws. In the past, some judges would bend over backwards to uphold gun restrictions. They'd use something called interest balancing, where they'd weigh your Second Amendment rights against the government's interest in public safety. The Supreme Court has now said that approach is wrong. Judges can't just bounce things out and decide the government wins. They have to stick to the historical test, period. Now, quick legal note, this is educational information, not legal advice. Always consult an attorney for your specific situation. Every case is different, and you need a lawyer who knows the laws in your state and how the Supreme Court ruling applies to your circumstances. Let me break down the historical test so you really understand it. When a court looks at a gun law now, they ask two main questions. 1. Does the Second Amendment's plain text cover the conduct you're talking about? In other words, does owning or carrying a gun fall under the Second Amendment? The answer is almost always yes. 2. Is there a historical tradition of regulating that conduct? This is where states have to do the work. They have to dig into history books, old laws, and court cases from the 1700s and 1800s to find similar restrictions. Here's the part nobody's talking about. Most states can't meet that burden. Why? Because back when the Second Amendment was written, there weren't a lot of gun laws. People carried guns openly, carried guns concealed, and there weren't background checks or permit systems. That means a lot of modern gun laws have no historical parallel, which makes them unconstitutional under this new test. Here's what most people get wrong. Some folks think this decision means all gun laws are going away. That's not true. The Supreme Court has said that certain restrictions are still allowed, like laws that keep guns away from felons or laws that ban guns in sensitive places like courthouses. But the key is that those restrictions have to be backed up by history. States can't just invent new sensitive places or new categories of prohibited persons without historical support. Hey, 73% of people watching right now aren't subscribed. Don't be part of that group. Join the 50,000 gun owners who get these updates first. Click subscribe. Trust me, the next few months are going to bring even more legal changes, and you don't want to miss a single one. Now let's talk about timing. This decision just came down, which means we're in the early stages of seeing its impact. Over the next 6 to 12 months, expect to see a flood of lawsuits challenging gun laws in every state. Some of those lawsuits will win, some will lose, but the overall trend is clear. Gun rights are expanding and gun restrictions are shrinking. Here's a hypothetical example to explain this. Let's say you live in a state that bans carrying firearms within 1,000 FT of a school. That's a pretty common law, right? Well, under this new Supreme Court standard, the state has to prove that similar laws existed historically. If they can't, that law is unconstitutional. Now, the federal government has a similar law, and it's been challenged before, but this new ruling gives challengers even more ammunition, no pun intended, to fight back. Another example, some states require you to take a training course before you can get a carry permit. Is that constitutional under the new test? It depends. If the state can show that training requirements existed back in the 1700s or 1800s, then maybe. But if there's no historical evidence, that requirement could be struck down. And here's the thing. Most states can't prove that training requirements existed back then, which means those laws are on shaky ground. This is the part that shocked me when I started researching this. Even laws that seem reasonable and common sense have to meet this strict historical test. It doesn't matter if the law sounds like a good idea or if it might save lives. If it doesn't have historical roots, it's unconstitutional. That's a huge shift in how courts handle gun cases. It's a massive win for Second Amendment advocates. But here's where it gets interesting. Not every court is going to apply this test the same way. Some judges are going to be strict and say states need very clear historical evidence. Other judges might be more lenient and accept broader historical analogies. That means we're going to see different results in different courts, and eventually some of these cases will go back to the Supreme Court for clarification. Now, let's talk about what you should do right now. 1. If you live in a state with strict gun laws, pay attention to legal challenges in your area. Gun rights groups like the Second Amendment Foundation, the Firearms Policy Coalition, and state-level organizations are filing lawsuits left and right. Some of those cases could directly benefit you by striking down laws that restrict your rights. 2. If you've been denied a permit or charged with a gun crime, talk to a lawyer immediately. This new Supreme Court decision could be the key to getting your permit approved or getting your charges dismissed. Don't just assume the government is right. Challenge them and make them prove their laws are constitutional. 3. Stay informed. Laws are changing fast, like really fast. What's legal today might be different tomorrow. Subscribe to channels like this one. Follow gun rights organizations and keep up with legal developments in your state. Knowledge is power, and in this case, it could keep you out of legal trouble. This information could literally expire after January 2026. Subscribe now because the next video explains exactly what you need to do before that deadline hits. I'm not exaggerating. There are legal changes coming in the next few months that will affect millions of gun owners, and you need to be ready. Here's the bottom line. The Supreme Court just handed down a unanimous decision that strengthens your Second Amendment rights and weakens the government's ability to restrict guns. This ruling applies in all 50 states, and it's going to lead to major changes in gun laws across the country. If you own a gun or carry a gun, this decision works in your favor, but you have to know how to use it. Now, here's my final point. This decision is a big win, but the fight isn't over. Anti-gun politicians and advocacy groups are already working on ways to get around this ruling. They're going to try to find historical evidence to support their laws, or they're going to craft new laws that they think will pass the test. That's why you need to stay vigilant and stay informed. So here's what I want you to do right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Share this video with other gun owners who need to know about this decision. Drop a comment below telling me what state you live in and what gun laws you want to see challenged. I read every comment, and your input helps me decide what to cover next. Remember, this is educational content, not legal advice. If you're facing a legal issue, talk to a qualified attorney in your state who understands gun laws and this new Supreme Court ruling. Every situation is different, and you need personalized guidance. Thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and thank you for being part of this community of informed, responsible gun owners. Stay safe, stay legal, and I'll see you in the next video.